Lee Dong-wook walked into the xenobiology classroom and felt every eye turned toward him. The silence was heavy, like a blanket that made breathing hard. He had expected this reaction. Humans were rare at the Galactic Academy, and most aliens had never seen one up close. The classroom was huge, with curved walls that seemed to bend upward forever. Floating desks hung in the air at different heights to fit the many types of students. Some aliens needed to be underwater, others required special gas to breathe, and a few floated without touching anything at all. Dong-wook found an empty desk near the back and sat down carefully. His human-made chair looked simple compared to the complex seats around him. To his left sat something that looked like a giant crystal with lights inside. To his right was a creature covered in hard shells like a crab, but much bigger. "Another Deathworlder," whispered a voice behind him. Dong-wook did not turn around, but he felt his face get warm. He knew what that word meant. Deathworlder. It was what they called beings who came from planets so dangerous that most life could not survive there. Earth was famous for being one of the worst death worlds in known space. A soft voice spoke next, to him. "Do not listen to them. They are just scared because they do not understand." Dong-wook looked over and saw another human sitting 2 desks away. She had short black hair and kind eyes. She looked to be about his age, maybe 20 standard years old. "I am Kang So-min," she said with a small smile. "My father works at the embassy here. I have been studying at the academy for 2 years now." "Lee Dong-wook," he replied, grateful to hear Korean being spoken. "I just transferred from New Seoul Colony. This is my first day." So-min nodded. "It gets easier. Most of the students here are good people, even if they seem afraid at first. They just come from very different worlds than we do." Before Dong-wook could ask what she meant, a tall figure walked into the room. The professor was unlike anything Dong-wook had ever seen. It stood on 2 legs like a human, but its skin was covered in small scales that changed color as it moved. Its head was long and narrow with large golden eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Good morning, students," the professor said. Its voice was soft but carried clearly through the room. "I am Professor Veltar. Welcome to Advanced Xenobiology. Today we will begin our study of apex predators from across the galaxy, the crystal." Being next to Dong-wook dimmed suddenly. The crab-like student made clicking sounds that seemed nervous. Even So-min shifted in her seat. Professor Veltar touched a control panel, and the room darkened. Above them a holographic image appeared. It showed a creature that looked like a cross between a wolf and a bird of prey. Its wings were black as night, and its claws gleamed like metal. "This is a Vorthak screamer from the planet Malthan Prime," the professor explained. "It hunts in packs and can fly at speeds of up to 300 kilometers per hour. The Malthan people built their entire civilization underground to escape these creatures." Several students made worried sounds. The crystal being's lights flickered rapidly and the crab student's shells rattled together. Professor Veltar changed the image. Now it showed something that looked like a snake, but it was as thick as a tree trunk and covered in sharp spines. The bone crusher of Zarian 4. It can grow to be 50 meters long and swallows its prey whole. The Zarian colonies had to develop special armor just to leave their cities safely. More nervous sounds filled the room. Dong-wook noticed that many students were sitting back in their seats, trying to get as far from the images as possible. The professor continued showing creatures from different worlds. Each one seemed more frightening than the last. There was a thing that looked like a giant spider made of living shadow. Another creature appeared to be made of liquid fire and could melt through metal. A third looked like a normal fish, until the image showed it opening a mouthful of teeth that could bite through solid rock. These apex predators represent the ultimate challenge that each species must face on their path to civilization, Professor Veltar said. Every race that reaches the stars must first learn to survive alongside such creatures, or find ways to avoid them entirely. Dong-wook looked around the classroom. The other students were all focused on the professor, but he could see fear in their body language. The crystal being had dimmed to almost nothing. The crab student had pulled its arms close to its body. Even creatures he could not identify seemed to be trying to make themselves smaller. So-min leaned over toward him. Most species in the galaxy evolved from prey animals, she whispered quietly. Herbivores, filter feeders, scavengers. They had to become very smart to survive. But they never stopped being afraid of predators. It is built into how their brains work. Dongwook nodded, understanding now why everyone seemed so tense. On Earth, humans had evolved differently. They were not prey animals. They were hunters who became the apex predators of their own world. The fear that filled this room was foreign to him. Professor Veltar changed the image again. This time it showed a creature that made the whole class gasp. It looked like a nightmare made real, a mass of tentacles and teeth that seemed to shift and change shape as they watched. The Shadow Eater of Grimm's world, the professor said. Perhaps the most feared predator in known space. It can phase through solid matter and hunt by scent alone. The people of Grimm's world had to abandon their entire planet because of these creatures. The room fell completely silent. Even the professor seemed affected by the image, its scales shifting to darker colors. Dongwook studied the creature carefully. It was certainly strange looking, but something about it seemed familiar. The way it moved reminded him of pictures he had seen of Earth animals. The tentacles moved like an octopus he had once watched in a nature documentary. The hunting behavior sounded like a big cat stalking prey. He found himself leaning forward to get a better look, genuinely curious about how such an interesting creature had evolved. As he did, he made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close to it. It was the sound someone makes when they see something that surprises them in a good way. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. Every head in the room turned to look at him. Professor Veltar's golden eyes focused directly on Dongwook, wide with surprise. The human realized that in a room full of frightened prey animals, he had just chuckled at their greatest nightmare. The silence in the classroom stretched on forever. Dongwook could feel his face burning red as every alien student stared at him. He had not meant to make any sound at all. It had just slipped out when he saw the creature in the hologram. Professor. Veltar's golden eyes stayed fixed on him. The professor's scales were shifting colors rapidly, which Dongwook was learning meant the alien was confused or upset. Is there something you find amusing about the Shadow Eater, Mr. Lee? The professor asked. Its voice was still soft, but there was something sharp underneath the words. Dongwook opened his mouth, then closed it again. How could he explain that the creature just looked interesting instead of scary? Around him, he could hear other students, whispering to each other in languages he did not understand. Before he could answer, the door to the classroom opened. A tall human walked in, carrying a data pad and wearing the blue uniform of a senior student. His name tag read, Park Hyun-soo, teaching assistant. Sorry I'm late, Professor, Hyun-soo said in Galactic Standard language. The biovault had some security issues this morning. He stopped walking when he noticed everyone staring at Dongwook instead of listening to him. Professor Veltar's scales slowly returned to their normal green color. Mr. Park, your timing is perfect. We were just discussing apex predators, and it seems Mr. Lee here has some thoughts about the Shadow Eater. Hyun-soo looked between the professor and Dongwook. As the only other human who had been at the academy, for a while he seemed to understand what had happened. A small smile appeared on his face. Ah, Hyun-soo said. First time seeing the Gallery of Galactic Nightmares? The crystal being next to Dongwook suddenly spoke. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The human made a sound of amusement when viewing the Shadow Eater. We do not understand how any being could find such a creature funny. It was not funny, Dongwook said quickly. It reminded me of something. What could such a horror possibly remind you of? Asked the crab-like student. Its voice was harsh and clicking, like rocks falling on metal. Dongwook looked at the hologram again. The Shadow Eater was still there, its tentacles moving in patterns that seemed almost like a dance. It moves like an octopus from Earth, and the way it hunts sounds like how big cats track prey. It is just different combinations of things I have seen before. The room erupted in surprised chatter. Students turned to each other, speaking in excited voices. The crystal being's lights flashed rapidly. Even Professor Veltar's scales shifted to a brighter color. "Silence, please," the professor said, raising one scaled hand. The room quieted down, but Dongwook could still feel the energy of surprise and curiosity. "Mr. Lee, are you saying this creature is similar to animals from your homeworld?" "Not exactly the same," Dongwook replied carefully. "But Earth has many predators. When you live with them, you learn to recognize patterns. This creature uses different methods, but the basic ideas are familiar." Hyun-Soo stepped forward. "Professor, if I may, I think this would be a perfect time for the live demonstration you mentioned." Several students made alarmed sounds. The crab students' shells began rattling again. "Live demonstration?" it asked in a high voice. Professor Veltar considered this for a moment. "You are correct, Mr. Park. Class, we were going to save this for later in the term, but perhaps now is the appropriate time." The professor moved to a different control panel. "I'm going to show you a living specimen from our bio vault. This is completely safe, and the containment fields are military grade." The lights in the room dimmed even more. Red warning lights began flashing along the walls. A computerized voice spoke in multiple languages. "Biohazard containment protocol active. All students remain seated." A section of the floor began to rise, forming a platform in the center of the room. On top of the platform, a shimmering energy field became visible. It looked like looking through water, making everything inside seem to bend and twist. "What we have here," Professor Veltar said, "is a juvenile Shadow Maw Ripper from the Deathworlder Chuckled. It is considered one of the most dangerous predators in known space." Inside the energy field, something began to take shape. At first, it looked like smoke, dark and shifting. Then Dongwook began to see details. It was about the size of a large dog, but its body seemed to be made of living shadow. Red eyes glowed in what might have been its head. Its mouth opened to show rows of teeth that gleamed like stars. The creature moved like liquid darkness, flowing from one side of its cage to the other. Sometimes it seemed solid. Other times it looked like it might flow through the containment field like water through a net. When it moved near the edge of its prison, the energy field sparked and hummed. Every alien student in the room pushed back from the demonstration. The crystal being went completely dark. The crab student made a sound like metal scraping against stone. Even Hyun-Soo, who had seen this before, looked uncomfortable, but Dongwook found himself leaning forward again. The creature was beautiful in its own way. Its movements were smooth and purposeful. The way it tested the edges of its cage showed intelligence. When it looked directly at the students, Dongwook could see curiosity in those red eyes, not just hunger. "The Shadow Maw Ripper can phase through most solid materials," Professor Veltar continued. "It hunts by scent and can track prey across vast distances. The civilization that once lived on Kethvar had to abandon their entire world because of these creatures." The creature in the cage seemed to notice the attention it was getting. It flowed to the side closest to the students and pressed against the energy field. The containment system sparked brighter but held firm. So-min whispered to Dongwook, "It is looking right at us. How can you be so calm?" Dongwook watched the creature's movements. "Look at how it moves. It is not trying to attack the field. It is testing it, like a cat checking a new territory. And see how its eyes track different students? It is curious about us too." "Curious?" the crystal being said, its lights flickering weakly. "It is planning how to hunt us." "Maybe," Dongwook said. "But on Earth, predators do not waste energy on prey they cannot catch. If it really wanted to hunt us, it would not show itself like this. It would hide and wait." Professor Veltar was listening to this exchange with great interest. "Mr. Lee, you seem remarkably calm around a creature that terrifies most sentient beings. Can you explain why?" Dongwook thought about this carefully. He looked around the room at all the frightened faces, some with eyes, some with light patterns, some with senses he could not even understand. They were all afraid, and their fear was real and valid. "On Earth," he said slowly, "humans grew up alongside predators. We learned that being afraid keeps you alive, but understanding keeps you smart. This creature is dangerous, yes, but it is also just an animal trying to survive, like anything else. The Shadowmaw Ripper seemed to hear his voice and turned toward him. For a moment, human and alien predator looked directly at each other through the energy field. The creature tilted its head slightly, like a dog hearing an interesting sound. Then, Dongwook did something that made the entire class gasp in shock. He smiled at the creature and gave it a small nod, the way someone might greet a neighbor's pet. The Shadowmaw Ripper's red eyes seemed to brighten for just a moment. Then it flowed to a different part of its cage and settled down to watch the class like it was waiting to see what would happen next. The classroom exploded into chaos. Students were talking in dozens of different languages, their voices mixing into a sound like rushing water. The crystal being's lights were flashing so fast they looked like a strobe light. The crab student was making clicking sounds that grew louder and faster. "Did the human just greet the Shadowmaw?" asked a voice that sounded like singing. "Is it broken? Is there something wrong with its survival instincts?" said another voice, this one like grinding stone. Professor Veltar raised all four of its arms for silence. "Please, everyone, calm down." The professor's scales were shifting through colors Dongwook had never seen before. "Mr. Lee, perhaps you could explain your reaction to the class?" Dongwook felt his face getting hot again. He had not meant to cause such a scene. Around him, dozens of alien eyes were staring, waiting for his answer. Even the Shadowmaw Ripper seemed to be listening from inside its cage. I do not know how to explain it," he said finally. "When I look at that creature, I do not see a monster. I see an animal that is very good at what it does. What it does is kill," said the crab student, its voice sharp with fear. "Yes," Dongwook agreed, "but so do many animals on Earth, sharks, tigers, wolves, eagles. They are all predators, but humans learned to live alongside them. We studied them, we learned their patterns, some of them even became our friends." The singing voice spoke again. "Friends? You became friends with apex predators?" So-Min cleared her throat. "If I may, Professor?" When the teacher nodded, she continued. "On Earth, humans domesticated wolves into dogs. We learned to work with dolphins to fish. We even trained birds of prey to hunt with us. What other species see as impossible, humans see as normal." A new voice joined the conversation. "That is fascinating, but also terrifying." Everyone turned to see a new figure standing in the doorway. This was another human, but older than the students. He wore the uniform of a military advisor, with badges that showed he had visited many different worlds. His name tag read, Kim Tae-young, Survival Specialist. "I apologize for interrupting, Professor," Tae-young said with a bow. "I was scheduled to give a guest lecture today on survival techniques from high-risk worlds." Professor Veltar's scales brightened. "Perfect timing, Advisor Kim. We were just discussing different perspectives on apex predators." Tae-young walked over to where he could see the Shadowmaw Ripper in its cage. The creature watched him with those glowing red eyes but made no aggressive movements. "Ah, a Shadowmaw," Tae-young said casually. "Beautiful specimen. Probably about 6 months old, judging by the color patterns." The entire class fell silent. Even Hyun-soo looked surprised. "You can tell its age?" Professor Veltar asked. "Of course. The red in its eyes gets brighter as they mature. This one still has some blue mixed in, which means it is still learning to hunt." Tae-young pointed at the creature's movements. "See how it keeps testing the containment field? An adult would have mapped the entire cage in the first few minutes and then ignored it. This one is still curious about everything." The crystal being's lights dimmed to almost nothing. "How do you know so much about them?" Tae-young smiled. "I spent 3 years on a research station near Kethvar. We were studying them to understand why they became so successful as predators. It turns out they are incredibly intelligent and social creatures." "Social?" the crab student asked in a whisper. "Oh yes. They hunt alone, but they share territory and information with family groups. The young ones play together, just like human children or wolf pups." Tae-young looked at the Shadow Maw, which had moved closer to listen. This little one is probably lonely, actually. They are not meant to be by themselves. Dongwook found himself nodding. That is why it seemed curious instead of aggressive. It wants company. Exactly right, Tae-young said with approval. You have good instincts for reading predator behavior. The professor's scales were now a color Dongwook had never seen before, a soft purple that seemed to glow. This is remarkable. Are you saying that humans can predict and understand the behavior of apex predators? Not just predict, Tae-young replied. We can often communicate with them. On Earth, we have always lived with dangerous animals. We learned that most predators do not want to fight unless they have to. Fighting wastes energy and risks injury. It is better to avoid conflict when possible. He walked closer to the containment field. The Shadow Maw moved to the edge nearest to him, watching intently. For example, Tae-young said, this little one is showing submission postures right now. Its head is slightly lowered, its body is relaxed, and it is not showing its teeth. In Shadow Maw body language, this means it recognizes me as a potential pack leader and is asking if I am friendly. The classroom was so quiet that Dongwook could hear the humming of the containment field. What would happen if you responded? Somin asked quietly. Tae-young considered this. Professor, do you mind if I demonstrate? It is completely safe. The containment field will not allow any physical contact. Professor Veltar looked nervous but nodded. Tae-young slowly crouched down until he was at eye level with the creature. Then he did something amazing. He made a low humming sound in his throat, almost like purring. The Shadow Maw's red eyes brightened, and it made a similar sound back. The two of them, human and alien predator, sat there having what could only be called a conversation in sounds no one else could understand. Incredible, whispered the professor. In 300 years of study, no one has ever attempted to communicate with a Shadow Maw, because most species see them as mindless killing machines, Tae-young said, still humming softly to the creature. But humans learned long ago that predators are often more intelligent than prey animals. They have to be to hunt successfully. Creature made a different sound, more like a question. Tae-young responded with a series of clicks and hums. The Shadow Maw seemed to relax, settling down in a more comfortable position while staying close to the edge of its cage. What are you talking about? Asked the singing voice. I told it that I am a friend, and that the young human over there, Tae-young nodded toward Dongwook, is also a friend. It wanted to know if you were all potential threats or potential pack members. And what did you tell it? The crab student asked, sounding terrified. That you are students here to learn. Same as it is. Tae-young stood up slowly. Shadow Maws are naturally teachers. Adult ones spend years training their young to hunt and survive. This one understands the concept of a school. Dongwook looked at the creature with new understanding. So when it was watching us earlier, it was trying to figure out what we were learning and if it could join in. Tae-young smiled. Curiosity is not a survival trait for prey animals, but it is essential for predators. They need to understand their environment completely. The crystal being's lights began to flicker in what might have been confusion. But it is a killer. How can it be intelligent and social and curious? Because those traits make it a better survivor, Dongwook said, finally understanding. Just like humans. The silence that followed was different from before. Instead of fear, it was filled with wonder and the sound of minds changing. The next day, Dongwook walked into the xenobiology classroom to find it completely transformed. Where before there had been floating desks in neat rows, now there were comfortable seating areas arranged in circles. Students were talking quietly, with each other instead of sitting in fearful silence. Professor Veltar was not alone at the front of the room. Next to the tall reptilian teacher stood a human woman wearing the white coat of a research scientist. Her name tag read, Dr. Choi Haewon, xenopsychologist. Good morning, class, Professor Veltar said as the last students found their seats. After yesterday's fascinating discussion, Dr. Choi has agreed to join us for a special session on evolutionary psychology and predator-prey relationships. Dr. Choi smiled warmly at the gathered students. I have been studying how different species perceive threats and form social bonds. What happened in this classroom yesterday was truly remarkable. You began to question assumptions that have existed for thousands of years. The crystal being, which Dongwook had learned was named Nira, flickered its lights in what he now knew was a sign of curiosity. Dr. Choi, are you saying that our fear of predators might be wrong? Not wrong, Dr. Choi replied gently. Your fear kept your species alive long enough to develop intelligence and technology, but it may be incomplete. Let me show you something. She touched a control pad, and a holographic display appeared above their heads. It showed what looked like ancient Earth, with early humans living alongside various animals. This is Earth approximately 50,000 years ago, Dr. Choi explained. Watch carefully. The hologram came to life. Dongwook saw early humans working together with wolves to hunt large animals. The wolves used their noses to track prey, while the humans used tools and strategy to corner it. Both groups shared the food afterward. Cooperation, said a new voice that sounded like water flowing over rocks. They are working together. Dongwook looked over to see a floating creature that looked like a jellyfish made of light. This was Moran from the Cloud Cities. It was the first time she had spoken in class. Exactly right, Dr. Choi said. Humans did not just survive alongside predators, they formed partnerships with them. Watch this. The scene changed to show humans and dolphins hunting fish together in shallow water. The dolphins would drive schools of fish toward waiting humans, who would catch them with nets. Both species benefited from working together. But how is this possible? Asked Rax, the crab-like student. Predators and prey cannot work together. It goes against all natural law. Dr. Choi smiled. That is what makes humans unique, Rax. They were never really prey animals. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They could run for hours without stopping, wearing down faster animals until they could catch them. They became apex predators through intelligence and teamwork, not through claws or fangs. She changed the hologram again. Now it showed a human family group, with children playing, near adults who were working. But around the edges of the camp, Dongwook could see the shapes of large cats watching peacefully. These are saber-toothed cats, Dr. Choi explained. They could easily kill a human in direct combat. But look, they are not attacking. They are curious. The humans have learned to read their body language and respect their space. In return, the cats leave the humans alone and sometimes even warn them about other dangers. So-min raised her hand. Dr. Choi, is this why humans can communicate with creatures like the Shadow Maw? Partly, yes. But it goes deeper than that. The hologram changed again, this time showing the inside of a human brain. Different areas were highlighted in different colors. Human brains developed something unique, the ability to see predators as individuals rather than just threats. I pointed to a bright blue area in the holographic brain. This is the area that recognizes patterns and predicts behavior. In most species, it shuts down when faced with a predator, because the fear response takes over. But in humans, it stays active. They can be afraid and still think clearly. Nira's lights flashed rapidly. So when Dongwook looked at the Shadow Maw, his brain was analyzing it like a puzzle instead of just screaming danger. Exactly. He saw the tentacle movement patterns and connected them to Earth Octopi. He heard the hunting description and thought of Earth cats. His brain was working, to understand, not just to survive. The crab student Rax made thoughtful clicking sounds, but surely this is dangerous. What if he was wrong about the creature's intentions? Dr. Choi nodded approvingly. An excellent question. The key is that humans learn to do both at the same time. Stay alert for danger while also gathering information. Let me show you. The hologram now showed a human walking through a forest. As they moved, colored lines appeared to show what the human was paying attention to. Most of the lines were focused on the path ahead and potential hiding spots for predators, but some were focused on animal tracks, scat, and other signs that showed what kinds of creatures lived in the area. The human is being careful, Dr. Choi explained, but also learning. By the time they finish this walk, they will know which predators live here, what they hunt, and how dangerous they are to humans specifically. Moran floated closer to the display. This is how humans became so successful at exploration and colonization. They do not just avoid dangerous worlds, they learn to understand them. Precisely. And that brings us to something interesting about Deathworld species in general. Dr. Choi touched the controls again, and the hologram showed various planets with dangerous environments. Every species that comes from a high-risk world develops some form of this ability. They have to, or they do not survive. She showed images of different aliens that Dong-wook did not recognize. These creatures looked tougher and more alert than the students in their classroom. These are all Deathworld species. Notice anything they have in common? Dong-wook studied the images carefully. They all look confident, like they are not afraid of their surroundings. Good observation. They have what we call environmental confidence, the ability to be comfortable in dangerous situations because they understand how to read and respond to threats. Rack shifted in his seat, his shells making soft clicking sounds. Are you saying that our fear makes us weak? Not weak, Dr. Choi said firmly. Different. Your species developed incredible intelligence, advanced technology, and peaceful societies. Because you learned to avoid conflict, that is a strength, not a weakness. She smiled at the whole class. But imagine what might be possible if we combined your intelligence and peaceful nature with the environmental confidence of Deathworld species. What if prey-evolved minds and predator-evolved minds worked together? The room fell quiet as everyone considered this idea. Professor Veltar spoke for the first time in a while. Dr. Choi, are you suggesting that the fear response and the analysis response could complement each other? I am suggesting that they already do, right here in this classroom. Yesterday, your students' natural caution kept everyone safe while Dong-wook's natural curiosity helped everyone learn something new. Nira's lights pulsed slowly, thoughtfully. So when Dong-wook chuckled at the shadow maw, he was not being reckless. He was being human. Exactly. And when the rest of you felt afraid, you were not being cowardly. You were being true to your own evolutionary heritage. Both responses have value. So-min raised her hand again. What would happen if more species learned to see things from both perspectives? Dr. Choi's smile grew wider. That, So-min, is exactly what we are about to find out. 3 months later, Dong-wook walked into the xenobiology classroom and barely recognized it. The space had been completely redesigned. Where once there had been neat rows of desks, now there were research stations scattered throughout the room. Students from different species worked together in small groups, their various forms of communication creating a gentle hum of learning. At the center of the room, the Shadow Maw Ripper still lived in its containment field, but everything about the situation had changed. The creature now had a larger space with different areas for sleeping, playing, and observing. Students regularly gathered around to watch its behavior and take notes. Good morning, Siku, Dong-wook said as he approached the containment field. The Shadow Maw, they had started calling it Siku, which meant ice in an old Earth language, moved toward the sound of his voice with obvious pleasure. Its red eyes were brighter now and it had grown noticeably larger. Siku made the purring sound that Tae-young had taught the class meant happiness and recognition. Dong-wook hummed. Back, a simple greeting that said, I see you, friend. It still amazes me that you can talk to it, said Nira, floating up beside him. The crystal being's lights were pulsing in the steady rhythm that meant contentment. We all can now, Dong-wook replied. You were making the clicking sounds yesterday that meant curious question. Siku understood you perfectly. It was true. Over the past months, the entire class had learned basic Shadow Maw communication. It had started as an experiment suggested by Dr. Choi, but had become something much more important. For the first time in galactic history, a prey-evolved species was actively studying and communicating with an apex predator. Rax scuttled over, his shell-plated arms full of data pads. Dong-wook, look at this. The sleep pattern data from last week shows something incredible. Dong-wook took the offered pad and studied the charts. Siku is dreaming more than it used to. Exactly. and Dr. Choi thinks the dreams might be more complex now that it has social interaction. It is not just a predator anymore. It is a member of a learning community. So Min joined their group carrying her own research materials. Professor Veltar wants to see all of us in the conference room. The report is finished. They walked together to the small conference room adjacent to the main classroom. Professor Veltar was there, along with Dr. Choi and several other faculty members that Dong-wook did not recognize. Their scales, feathers, and other features marked them as coming from many different worlds. "Students, please sit," Professor Veltar said. Its scales were the bright gold color that meant excitement. "We have remarkable news." Dr. Choi stood up, holding a thick document. "Your work over the past 3 months has been extraordinary. The Galactic Academic Council has reviewed your research, and they want to present it at the Interspecies Science Conference next month." The students looked at each other in amazement. The Interspecies Science Conference happened only once every 5 years, and was attended by the greatest minds from across the galaxy. "What exactly are we presenting?" asked Moran, her jellyfish-like form glowing with curiosity. "Everything," Dr. Choi said with a huge smile. "Your communication protocols with Siku, your analysis of cross-species learning patterns, your theories about how predator-evolved and prey-evolved minds can work together. But most importantly, your proof that fear and understanding can coexist." One of the unknown faculty members spoke up. This one looked like a tree with moving branches, and its voice was like wind through leaves. "I am Professor Branch that reaches far from the core worlds. I must admit, when I first heard about this experiment, I thought it was dangerous foolishness." The tree-like being's branches swayed thoughtfully. "I was wrong. What you have accomplished here challenges thousands of years of accepted science. You have shown that the galaxy's greatest fear, apex predators, might actually be our greatest teachers." Rax's shells clicked nervously. "Teachers? How so?" Dr. Choi answered. "Predators have to understand their environment completely to survive. They notice things that prey animals miss. When Siku watches our class, it sees social dynamics and learning patterns that even we do not recognize." She touched a control panel, and a holographic display appeared. It showed the classroom from Siku's perspective, with different students, highlighted in different colors. Siku has been mapping our relationships and communication styles. It knows who learns best by watching, who needs to hear explanations, and who has to try things themselves. It is teaching us about ourselves. Nira's lights flashed in the rapid pattern that meant amazement. "So while we were learning about it, it was studying us?" "Of course," Dong-wook said. "That is what predators do. They observe and analyze until they understand everything about their environment." Professor Veltar spoke again. "The council has made a decision. Based on your success here, they are creating a new program. Mixed evolutionary learning groups will be established at academies throughout the galaxy." "What does that mean?" So Min asked. "It means," said Dr. Choi, "that students from prey-evolved species will be paired with students from predator-evolved species. Herbivores working with carnivores, filter feeders learning alongside hunters, each bringing their own perspective to shared problems." The tree professor's branches rustled with what might have been laughter. "They are also planning to introduce controlled predator observation programs. Not just holograms and recordings, but actual living creatures like your Siku." "The galaxy is not ready for that," Rax said, clicking nervously. "The galaxy was not ready for this either," Dr. Choi pointed out. "But look what you accomplished." She was right. When Dong-wook looked around the room, he saw students from completely different evolutionary paths working together as friends. Nira, whose species had hidden underground for millennia to escape predators, was now planning to specialize in apex predator behavioral studies. Rax was developing new containment technologies that were safer for both researchers and creatures. Moran had discovered a talent for cross-species translation. "There is one more thing," Professor Veltar said. "The council wants to name the program after this class. They are calling it the Predator-Prey Integration Initiative." "That sounds very official," Dong-wook said with a smile. "Too official," agreed So-min. "What should we call it really?" They all looked at each other, then turned to look through. the transparent wall at Siku, who was playing with a puzzle toy they had given it. The young Shadow Maw was completely absorbed in figuring out how to unlock the treats inside. How about the Siku project? Suggested Nira. Everyone agreed that sounded much better. As they walked back to the main classroom, Dongwook reflected on how much had changed since that first day, when his quiet chuckle had shocked everyone. The fear was not gone. Rax, still, jumped when Siku moved suddenly, and Nira still dimmed her lights when the creature looked directly at her. But alongside the fear was something new. Respect, curiosity, and understanding. Siku sensed their approach and flowed to the edge of its containment field. It made the complex trilling sound that meant pack gathering in its language. Yes, Dongwook said in the same language, we are all here. The creature settled down in its favorite spot and began to purr, the deep sound filling the room with contentment. Around it, students from across the galaxy continued their work, no longer separated by the accident of evolution that had made some hunters and others hunted. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that understanding was stronger than instinct, and that the greatest discoveries came from the courage to look beyond fear and see the universe with new eyes. In the end, that was the most human thing they could have learned.